I'll move on to the next feedback. Right, in changing producer or consumer mindset, rank your commitments from private sector perspective, and looks like education awareness. And I thank you all again for coming to this climate conversation, because I think it's so really important to have this conversation, because it's just not sembang for the sake of bersembang, that's the Malay word for conversation, but I think conversations like this can catalyze changes at many levels, and it looks like education. And while Dr. Cho, this is still within your ambit, but other panelists would like to respond to any of this feedback. It looks like we've got education, offering greener products, greening supply chain, Widen green investment, and Intensify R&D. That was the ranking. Anybody would like to quickly react? Dr. Tan?
I just want to maybe elaborate a bit on our observations where we do work overseas.
Right.
Not just in Malaysia. Most of the people don't really care.
Of course.
So you go to cities that are mega cities, you try and tell them about green product, they don't know what it is.
Right.
So actually, the filtering down from, maybe the nomenclature is too complex, you know, right. SDG goals and all. You go and tell a third world country that they are trying to survive from looking for, you know, the next salary on SDG goals, he'll think that, you know, you came from Mars. It's basically like that. Right. And I think we need to really address this loss in translation from the top down. I get very amused when I come to conferences where there's so many terms that you know, you sometimes have to check on your Google so that you don't embarrass yourself. Right. But I think that's what most people feel, you know, oh, there's a new term that's come out this year. No, I better not sound stupid by not knowing. But actually, the reality down there is people are trying to survive. So the translation down from this high talk to the grassroots, where the rubber hits the road, it's very poor translation down. And the danger that I see, 10 years ago, and even for Gomit would be like a lifetime ago, before us, where we started this green movement, we were seen as radicals. We were on the cutting edge, and people either liked us or didn't like us. Mostly they didn't like us. And then now I come to conferences and it's become mainstream. You've got to talk the lingo, otherwise you're not radical enough. And now you see in the news today, people are protesting. Protesting seems to be the new thing. Have you seen the show Joker? and you see that lawlessness, the mystery of lawlessness is starting to appear in big cities. And green, they are championing something that I think half of them don't even understand what it is. And they're talking climate change, and it's become a catchphrase rather than a reality. And soon, nobody will listen to us anymore, you know, because the voice on the street will get louder than the voice of logic, and people like us will be seen as the old dinosaurs who tried to change the world but failed. So I think we are very fast coming to that point. And then what happens to big cities like Lagos, Dhaka? Dhaka for the past 30 years has been encapsulated in soot, you know, because they burn charcoal. But nobody brings them up as a country. They're very rich now. They just bought our hotels. and nobody actually brings it up that they need to sort of address it. They got green movement and everything, but its impact is very, very small. Right. So I'm not trying to sound like a pessimist. That's why Mars starts to look good. But it's this population growth thing that needs to come back down to a very grassroots level to make these policies real to them. That's what I feel, yeah.
Right, thank you, Dr. Tan. I'll give it to Dr. Cho, and then I'll come to you, Tao. Right.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to respond to Dr. Tan, just 3 points, if I may. First, may I express my empathy with struggling over this terminology. I find a very simple question that I always use is, please tell me what do you mean? And that they then have to explain exactly what they mean, and hopefully it makes sense. If it doesn't, then perhaps you need to question what they're saying. Secondly, absolutely right. We believe that the population, the global population will grow. We actually use the UN estimates of global population, projections of global population in our sky scenario. So we know it will expand. we also take account, and this is why the sky scenario gets very difficult. It doesn't assume that energy demand is capped. We assume that global economic growth continues. We assume that global energy demand will therefore rise because people will demand greater standards, higher standards of living. And when I say higher standards of living, I'm not talking about leading a super luxurious lifestyle. We set a bar of about 100 gigajoules per person. And the idea is that to reach an average standard of living somewhat equivalent to China or Ukraine today. So it is decent, but modest. And that's a target we aim for towards the end of this century. And that implies even pulling all these levers, efficiency, renewables, you just name it, even pulling all these levers, this requires a great deal of effort to actually get to that level while keeping us below, within the Paris targets that have been, that we're all committed to. So that's the second point I'd like to make. The third, I was just reminded, Dr. Tan, of the very powerful point you made on plastics, because I had a very interesting experience. I went to Kenya last year for the first time, and I was warned before I went to Kenya that anyone found with a plastic bag would face a very heavy fine or might even go to prison. Right. And so I asked about it, what exactly was going on? And it turned out it started with just a couple of activists in Kenya who started a movement that snowballed, that boomed, and eventually it led to this very strict government legislation. So, big things can happen from very small initiatives, and let's just be mindful of that, and let's not forget how important local consumer activism can be.
And of course, Dr. Teo.
Thank you. I think from my observation of colleagues' answer to the first two questions, what struck me most is I think it all converged into one word, which is mainstreaming. Mm-hmm. So the first question, I see that the highest score lies in changing producer and consumer mindsets. And here, we also have the highest rank on education and awareness. I fully concur with this finding, is that what matters most is we fully become aware of this issue, become conscious of this issue, and really integrate these climate consideration, sustainability consideration into everything we do. So for governments, the World Bank Group has been advising to integrate climate consideration, sustainability thinking into the policy making, into macro-fiscal analysis, into the financial system. For businesses, as I mentioned earlier in my speech, we also advise the private sector companies integrate the climate consideration, the risks and the opportunities that the climate change can bring to you into everything you do. And individuals, as Dr. Chu said, we all need to really think about how integrate this thinking into our day-to-day behavior, right? So that's something I think very fundamental. So we all have really a part to play in this endeavor.
Right. I think sometimes bringing the conversation, and I agree, it's sometimes so complex, right? I mean, even when I got back to climate discussions, there were so many abbreviations that you don't really know what it means. But when I was doing a bit of plastic work, I think when you bring plastic to an individual level, and when that paper was produced that if you might be consuming 5 milligrams or a credit card equivalent of plastic every week, that hit people because it affected them directly. They knew that their behavior towards plastic directly comes back to them. That, I think, started bringing a lot of change. And you see a lot of conversation around plastic these days. And that's great. So it's always human behavior. When it affects me directly, my health, then there'll be changes.